Hello, welcome to lesson number 17. This mindfulness tool is the 10 thinking errors. So everyone has a mind. Everyone has a mind which can imagine it can solve problems. Our mind is an amazing device, organ, which we're only really beginning to understand. And as amazing as it is flawed. And the 10 thinking errors, which we all have, and you will recognize, are evidence of its flawed nature. So I'm going to very briefly walk you through all 10 of the thinking errors, and I'll do my best to provide some examples as well. Some of them do overlap as well. So if I do give some examples and you think, hey, that sounds a bit like the other one, then often a way of thinking can demonstrate more than one thinking error. So let's look at them. So the first one we'll look at, top left, is emotional reasoning. And the definition of emotional reasoning here is assuming that because we feel a certain way, that we think that must be true. Let's say, for example, that you feel really guilty about something. You feel really guilty because you saw a friend who was upset and you think, oh, it must have been what I said to her last night. You speak to her and it turns out that she was crying for a totally unrelated reason. This is an example of emotional reasoning. We feel a certain way and we assume that that's based on the truth. So that's emotional reasoning. The second one, very popular, is overgeneralizing. So we're seeing a pattern based upon a single event or being overly broad in the conclusions that we draw. So let's say that you fail. You have a failure. You may say to yourself, oh my goodness, I always fail. That's not true. That's not true. There's times where you don't fail. There's times when you do tremendously well. But in that moment, your mind is overgeneralizing and saying that I always fail. So we've got some words here: all, every, nothing, forever. Never is another one. Oh, I never get my way. As children, we can say this to our parents, right? We go, I know you never let me have ice cream. It's not true. We're just emotional in that moment and we're overgeneralizing. Labeling. So assigning labels to ourselves or other people. So it says here, hello, my name is stupid. So, you fail and you label yourself. You say that you're stupid or things don't go the way you want them to and you call yourself unlucky. Again, this is something that we all do. We label ourselves or other people based on a experience, just one experience. So that's not helpful. That's not helpful for us to label ourselves. Just because we fail once doesn't necessarily mean that we are a failure. Just because we're unlucky once or twice doesn't mean that we are unlucky as a person. The fourth thinking error is jumping to conclusions, imagining we know what others are thinking or predicting of the future. So I think that our gut feeling is often right. If you're like me, then you probably have a strong gut feeling, a suspicion, an inkling. I think that's another way of putting it. A hunch, whatever you want to, whatever words you want to use to describe this. You have that intuition that, something isn't quite right. It's sometimes wrong. Sometimes we do jump to conclusions. We can look at the friend who is upset with us. So to go back to the first example, we can look at our friend who's crying and assume we can jump to conclusions that they're upset because of something that we did. We personalize it when actually it's nothing to do with us. Okay. Or we can do a test, submit the test and think, oh my goodness, that went so bad. I'm going to fail. And then a few weeks later, you find out that you passed the test and did really well. So jumping to conclusions is another unhelpful thinking style. Mental filter. only paying attention to certain types of evidence, noticing our failures, but not seeing our successes. So we've got some examples here. We can be described as good or interesting or bad, and the thought there is, I'm a failure. So let me explain this one. That's not the best description of this. Mental filter, only paying attention to certain types of evidence. So let's say, for example, that you are having a review with a teacher or an employer, and they tell you 5 things that they love about you, 5 things you're doing really well, and they tell you one thing that you could improve on. Which one are you going to remember? Okay, you're going to remember the improvement. You're going to remember the thing which is most painful. Our minds have a negative bias, which means that we notice, pay attention, and remember negative things far more often than positive things. So this is an example of mental filtering. We're always going to notice, remember, pay attention to the negative thing. So, to balance that mental filter, you have to go back and think, okay, well, what was said altogether? Was it all bad? Or am I just remembering the one bad thing that person said about me? Down the bottom, we've got a nice emoji there. Should or must. So using critical words like should or must or ought can make us feel guilty or like we have already failed. If we apply shoulds to other people, the result is frustration. So think of one of your shoulds, something that you should do more of. Maybe that's drink more water. Maybe you feel you should go to bed earlier. Maybe you feel you should work harder. Okay? How does it feel to say and use those words should? For me, it's quite a heavy feeling. It's tied in with feeling guilty, like I'm not attending to my responsibilities. It's not a very empowering way to think. It's not an empowering way to talk. So rather than should, say I will, or I can, or I'm going to. Okay, if you're really serious about making a change in your life, don't say I should, say I'm going to, I will, I am. Far more empowering language. But this is the way that the mind works. We experience thoughts that say I should, I must, I ought to. Personalization. So to go back to that example one more time with the friend who you think is upset with you, personalization. Your mind assumes that you had something to do with those tears. You were the reason why your friend was upset. It's the nature of our mind to personalize things. We like to think, we like to believe that we're far more important than we really are. So personalization, it says here, is blaming yourself or taking responsibility for something that wasn't completely your fault. This is personalization, is when we make it about us. The next one, all or nothing thinking. So we've got an example here, it's black or it's white. The mind is very, very good at this. So for example, you fail one test, the first test, and your mind says, I knew this course was wrong. Okay, so that's all or nothing thinking. If I haven't passed this test, it means that I must be a complete failure. It must be that the course isn't right for me. So watch out for that all or nothing thinking. Disqualifying the positive. So discounting the good things that have happened or that you've done for some reason or another. So again, this is similar to mental filter. Like I said, there may be a little bit of an overlap. So disqualifying the positive. Let's say that you're creating a product. Let's say that you're selling lemonade, for example, and you sell this lemonade throughout the course of a day, and most people compliment you and say how nice it tastes and what a good job you're doing. One grumpy old man complains and says, well, you're wasting your time, this tastes horrible, you should go home. You go home and you share to the people at home how the day went, and you go, it wasn't too great actually. This one guy, he complains, so I'm not going to go back tomorrow and sell my lemonade. You're disqualifying the positive, because the majority of people like the lemonade, so that it tastes good, and that would be evidence that you could continue doing that. But again, the mind will always will always focus on the negative. So again, the way to remedy that is just to look at the full picture, look at what was true, because what your mind presents to you isn't always going to be based on the truth. It's going to have to come through these different filters. Okay, and we all have these filters. Some people will experience others more than the rest. So this one here, last one, which is magnification, also known as, I can never say this word, catastrophizing, like a catastrophizing, that's the one, and minimization. So it's when you make things bigger or smaller than they actually are. So let's say that I win an amount of money on the lottery, and I go and tell all my friends, "Oh, this is amazing! I'm set for life." Turns out I've only won a couple of thousand. But for me, I'm magnifying this amount of money. I'm overestimating how well I have done and what I can do with this money. Another example would be minimization. So let's say that I've upset somebody close to me, and a mutual friend says, "Hey, you've really upset her." And I say, "No, it's all right. It was nothing. They'll get over it." I'm minimizing my behavior. I'm minimizing the effect that I've had on that person. So this one here, magnification and minimization, I think this is probably a self-defense mechanism. We try and preserve our self-image. We like to think of ourselves as, being stable and being good people. So I think that is probably the the reason why we have magnification and minimization. So they're the 10 common unhelpful thinking styles or thinking errors. They're referred to a number of different ways. So now, which thinking styles sound most like you? And you've probably got more than one. Write it down. And commit to, next time you spot this thinking style, to respond. So one way to respond is just by recognizing it and saying, "Oh, okay, that's my mind. This is my mind filtering a certain way, perhaps being black and white in its thinking. Perhaps it's disregarding the positive. Perhaps it's minimizing." Just recognize it for what it is. And another powerful thing to do to respond is to ask a question and say, what is true? So maybe your mind is saying, "Oh, so-and-so is upset with me." And you say, "Okay, is that true? How can I find out? What action can I take to find out whether that is true?" Okay, hopefully you have enjoyed this. Hopefully you found this lesson helpful. Just be aware of these thinking errors. We all have them. We will get caught up in these thinking errors, these filters from time to time. It's your job just to stay as aware as you can, recognize them. Anytime you're having a bad day, here's a great tip. Anytime you're having a bad day, chances are that your thinking styles are working against you. So if I'm having a bad day, if I'm frustrated with somebody or frustrated with myself, I'll often come back and look at these thinking errors and go, "Oh, okay, I'm doing black and white thinking. I'm thinking that it's much worse than it actually is." Okay. I'll see you for the next lesson. Thank you for joining me as always, and I'll see you soon.